And considering the topic of this talk, I think he deserves a second round of applause, getting through immigrations and custom enforcement. That remains to be seen, yes. Yes, of course. So, yeah, so welcome. And if you have any issues or anything, just give me a holler. I'll be right there.
Sure, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Fadli. This is my first time in America. And I'm pretty nervous because most of the time I speak in Southeast Asia, India, Thailand, Singapore, Indonesia. But this is the first time I have an audience with blonde hair, blue eyes, and stuff. So don't mind me. Okay, so basically today I'm going to talk about vulnerability assessment on SCADA. How I own the power grid. The topic may sound a bit exaggerated, but along the way you may realize that it is possible to actually own critical infrastructure. So this is a topic that I will be sharing with you, like the keynote previously mentioned. It's good to actually share something that you found. So in this talk, I'm going to talk about my experience performing assessment on SCADA networks. And for those of you who have yet to introduce to such systems, this is a good topic for you to just listen, and when you have a chance one day to actually perform assessment on SCADA, hopefully my talk will help you on that. So you can refer back to my talk. So a little bit info about myself. I've been in the IT and security line for over 8 years. I'm a Singaporean. I work in BT. I'm not so sure if you heard of it. And I'm a cybersecurity enthusiast. During my spare time, I love writing articles. So I contribute to magazines such as Pentest Mag or Hacking Night, and I like to actually join competition like Catch the Flag kind of competition, but most of it are in the Southeast Asia region. I have a blog. I think most of you also have one, as well as a Twitter. But I don't talk much in Twitter. I just post articles only. And I've done VAPT, which is vulnerability assessment and penetration testing across many regions, mainly in the EMEA regions, which means Asia, Middle East, and Africa. So those are the regions that I currently am responsible when performing such assessment. So I want to ask you guys to understand more about my audience. How many of you have actually performed exploitation on SCADA systems? Wow, I'm quite pressure now. Okay, how many of you have performed vulnerability assessment on SCADA networks? Nice. And how many of you have heard of SCADA but never actually touched it? Okay, good. I think my talk will be, you guys will be the focus of my talk. So what is SCADA? For those who don't know, SCADA stands for Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition. It's a system that analyzes real-time data. They actually used in industries such as oil and gas, water and waste control, energy, oil and traffic, nuclear power plants, and stuff like that. So it gathers information if there is a leak on the pipeline and transfer the information back to the central site. Then from the central site, they contact the home station and thus performing the proper analysis and control. So that's basically what SCADA is. So there are so many SCADA systems: DCS, SMS, SCS. Like for example, DCS stands for Distributed Control System, SCS stands for Supervised Control System, SMS is SCADA's monitoring system or supervisory monitoring system. But all these systems, despite their individual terms, they all have one thing in common, which is a HMI. A HMI stands for Human Machine Interface. It's something like a GUI in IT, but this HMI is actually used only for ICS or /SCADA environment. So I'm not so sure if you can see clearly. Let me show you an example of how a HMI looks like. You can download this application. Let me take. Okay. So this is an example of SCADA system. You can actually download this particular thing called Schneider Electric or something, Schneider Electric. So, sorry, my screen is a bit small, not so sure what happened there, but this is an example of how a SCADA system looks like. Can't even. Yeah, so, yeah. Okay. So a typical SCADA network architecture, the ones that I've actually been through and performed my assessment on, is something like this. So you have a SCADA network. Everything, all your system, your application, your servers are all into one network. There's no segregation. There's no, everything, I mean basically everything is on one single network. And the focus of my talk today will actually be the system residing in the SCADA network. So I'm not going to talk about PLC or RTUs. Only the system, the HMI, the servers, the application, the database and stuff like that. So this is a typical SCADA control. On the left-hand side, back in the 1960s, this is how a SCADA control looks like. Very physical, manual, and of course, very tedious actually. Everything is all physical. You need to be basically on the site itself to actually perform your operations. So in the 90s, when operating systems such as Windows came along, SCADA migrated most of this system from using like the black and white. They changed it to operating systems such as Windows. It's portable. It's portable. You can actually access remotely and stuff like that. That's the reason why they actually prefer to use those kind of IT systems rather than back in the old days. And Homer Simpson below, whether you realize it or not, is actually using an old ICS system. Okay. So why you should care? SCADA affects our daily lives, from the water you drink in this bottle, from the gas you receive in your kitchen, to the electricity that you see at home. Critical organizations such as banks, hospitals, Wall Street need continuous supply of such power and energy. So without it, millions of dollars could be lost and lives could be affected. So things like, movies such as Die Hard 4 is a good example. And speaking of Die Hard 4, this is Eugene Kaspersky. I'm pretty sure everybody knows who is Eugene Kaspersky. According to him, when he watched the first 20 minutes, he was pissed off with the movie because to him, it's like a manual for cyber terrorists. So I'm going to play a short movie here from Die Hard 4. Who have yet to watch Die Hard 4? Great. Let me show you. So there are two main clips that entice me into showing you guys here. So this is attacking the gas pipeline. Okay, let me shut this thing off first.
Please no. It's Thomas Gabriel. Shit. You know this guy? I worked with him. He was DOD's chief programmer for infrastructure security. After 9/11, he's the guy that told Joint Chiefs the system was vulnerable. He was pushing for a total overhaul, but they wouldn't listen. Gabriel's not exactly people friendly. You think so? When he tried to go public, they crucified him. Destroyed his reputation. Froze assets after that. He disappeared.
We got a pretty serious problem.
Hold on 1 minute. What?
I think we need to get out of here right now. They're sending the gas lines here.
Gas lines? What gas lines?
Christ. Oh, all of them. See that? Those flashing arrows? That's not good.
All that's coming here?
Yeah, I think we gotta go.
Hey, listen, I gotta go. Just find Thomas Gabriel. McLean. Let's go finish this up. Right now. Come on. Let's go.
So that's the first clip. So the second one is about the hacker attacking power lines. Let me go back here.
Huh? Take a look around. Are you out of your mind? Does it look like we're even close to winning? We just got the shit kicked out of us. What, you think I'm holding out on you? Something I'm just not telling you? If I knew what they wanted, I would tell you. I would happily tell you. Jesus.
So that's the clip for the attacking the power lines. I love the movie so much. So I actually watched a couple of times before I actually come here. So those of you who have yet to watch the movie, check it out. It's very good, especially they're actually focusing on the critical infrastructure security and how vulnerable the US is especially. So, so when it comes to... Yes, I'll show you how... I will show you. At the end of the presentation, I will show you a slide demo on how easily it is to actually find critical infrastructure systems online and how you can actually exploit it. Well, okay, that's first. No. Sure, thanks. Okay, so yeah, I watch war games, man. Okay, so based on the attacks, recent articles prompt me to actually share with you. Like for example, if you say it may be impossible to actually happen, but if you look at the articles previously, there has actually been shown cyber attacks compromised more than 1,000 power plant systems. Foreign hackers targeted U.S. water plant. Russians attacking U.S. critical infrastructure. Electricity grid in U.S. penetrated by spies. So basically, US are always the target or the favorite among hackers around the world to actually attack. So, yep. And despite all the attacks, study has shown that only 28% of the directors of critical infrastructure prioritize security. Other than that, the rest of the 72% doesn't really care, because most of these people, they don't really care so much about the state of security. They only care about the operational state. As long as it's working, that's fine. So, this is where security professionals like you and I, or hackers, come to the rescue. So basically, because we know, most of us know how easy it is to actually attack or defend. And most of these organizations that I've been to, they don't have people like CIOs. They don't have people like CSOs. They only have operational engineers, directors, everything to do with operations, nothing to do with security. So when one of the sites, when I was there, even when they were shown a certain pop-up to the screen, a Windows pop-up to click continue or just ignore, they do not know what to do. They simply don't dare what to click. So they have to call the SCADA engineers to actually tell them, look, I have this pop-up, what do you want me to do? So all these operational people, they only know about how to perform the operational stuff on their HMI. Other than that, they have no clue how critical their system is. So it's not that bad. Other than, network security or computer security, they do have one security in place, which is the physical security. The reason is, back in the 1960s, they don't really concentrate so much on network security because their systems are all using proprietary protocols. Everything is standalone, everything is isolated, so you don't really actually have to connect to the internet to actually get into SCADA systems. One of the sites when I was there, my paper was actually mistook. There was a typo in my paper, so I was held for over 2 hours just to make sure that my paper gets corrected before I come into the site. It's a power plant. You need to drive in 4 hours just to go to the site, so it's very tedious. But at least they have the physical security in there. The 1960s, only physical security is the focus. So this talk is not about hacking SCADA application. I'm not going to talk about hacking SCADA system or hacking SCADA networks. There are tons of talks out there. So these are some of the screenshots that I got from YouTube. Just by typing hacking SCADA or exploiting SCADA, there are a lot of talks. You know, people like Jeremy Brown, who actually created a small tool to hack SCADA application on Windows system, and people like Justin Searle from Sense. He created a framework called Samurai SCADA testing framework, a very good tool to actually perform assessment on SCADA systems. So these are something that you might want to take note and play around with. So this talk, I'm going to talk about how I actually perform vulnerability assessment on SCADA networks. Asking the right questions, the mistakes that I made, or the additional things that I needed to do, the lessons learned, and how to develop a proper process and methodology on performing SCADA assessment. So what I've done so far during my engagement, I did over 500 SCADA workstation, 100 over SCADA servers, and 200 over network devices. So I know some of you here might have done more than me, but although these are just the things that I did, I'm here just to share with you the mistakes made so that in future when you guys had a chance to actually perform this assessment, you guys know what to do. You know, don't repeat the same mistake that I made previously. So SCADA versus corporate environment. Traditionally, if you like in banks, normal organization, financial or whatsoever, they typically have three kinds of environments: staging, development, staging, and production. But for SCADA, I'm not so sure some of you here who may have a different experience than me. For SCADA, there's only production environment. There's no staging, there's no development. So thus, that's why critical, because you don't have a backup. They do have emergency site, but typically they only have production. There's no development, there's no staging. So that's one of the tough part for SCADA systems, infrastructure. So the tools I use to perform the assessment are these four. I'm pretty sure everyone here knows it: Nmap, Wireshark, Nessus, and the Ping utility. So what happened? So let me share with you something. Every time when you want to perform something or you get a chance to perform something, it's always based on opportunity. So my opportunity came when I was supposed to actually be on site to one of the countries in the Middle East to shadow somebody, to shadow a colleague. So I have no idea what SCADA was at that time. I have no idea how critical their systems are or how sensitive their systems are. But during the day, on the day itself, when I reached there, my colleague was from America. He had some problems with the flight, so he got delayed. So I was there all by myself. I cannot afford to actually postpone the trip because it's in order for me to, from the hotel to the site, takes about 4 to 5 hours. So I'm not going to just postpone it. So what I did, I reached the site, do the typical thing that I normally do, collect the IP address, run the Nessus default scan, and just relax. And 2 hours later, the operational managers receive a lot of phone calls. I don't understand what it means because, you know, in the Middle East, they have their own language. But the two main words that I understand was the name of the site and the word down. So this site down, this site down, this site down. So I was like, when I look at my scans, I noticed that the name of the site was actually the site I was scanning at that time. So I was very worried. But the good thing is there were no log management in place. So I tried to escape my way. But of course, they eventually found out from the event viewer, you know, my IP was the last IP that was there. So 2 hours later, this was what happened. So some of the sites were unable to collect, the workstation were unable to collect data from the application servers. Some of the application got hanged, and some even worse, some of the system even had a sudden reboot. So I was worried. I have no idea this that this happened. So all these things like, for me to find out more about SCADA, I read online within 15 hours before the next day. I actually learned a lot about SCADA. Yeah. So I went online and find out what caused the system to have this kind of issues. So that's when I realized that besides doing what I normally do, which is segregating the systems, the server's workstation, then before you scan the passive first, before you scan the active. Then you need to do additional steps. Instead of running Nessus default scans, you need to actually play around with the plugins and performance. So these are the additional settings that you need to actually play around or customize before you perform the scan. So this also I found out. The default scan, this is the default settings for Nessus when you perform a scan. How many of you actually have a good habit to throttle or customize your Nessus policy? If you use Nessus. A handful of hands, awesome, nice. So this is the default one. So by default, you are using a max host per scan 80. And the max TCP session and TCP session per scan or per host is unlimited. I think that was where the problem was. It's unlimited. So some of the systems were very old. When I was performing my assessment, they couldn't handle the load. So when I read online, one of the advice that was shown there was to actually throttle the scans. Instead of using unlimited, play on with the numbers. So put it to 15, 30 to 50, 30 above and 15 below. So then after that, you can actually play with 10 or 5. It all depends on how you want to play. I cannot tell you specifically why I throttled to those numbers, but after throttling to those numbers and playing around with the plugin selection, so this plugin selection is also another important step for you need to do. So whenever you perform assessment, make sure you find out what application or what are they running. So if for example, if the system is using a Windows system, then you can actually uncheck all those Linux-based plugins. Then if you find out what database are running, so if their system are using Microsoft SQL servers, for example, so you can uncheck those Oracle or MySQL. So the lesser the plugins you use, the better your scans are. I mean, it's safer and more relaxed for the system actually. And after changing these two, which is throttling the TCP session as well as the plugin selection, this was how my system looked like. On the left hand side is my Nessus scan, on the right hand side is my ping utility, and below is my Wireshark. The reason why I went ping is because every time when I scan, previously on the first day, I didn't know whether the system got reboot or not. So lesson learned, when I do a ping, there's a reply, at least I know that the system that I'm scanning are still alive and kicking. Rather than, if you were to see something like request timer all of a sudden, then you know something is wrong with the scans. So from day 2 to day 10, everything was okay. But on day 11, the system crashed again. Some of the system crashed again. So what I was like, don't know what to do. I tried to throttle everything and still some of the system crash again. And then this is what I realized. Some of the systems were actually running on these ancient operating systems. Windows NT 3.1 and Windows NT 4. Anyone who is above 28 years old here have used this system before. Under 28, probably you have no idea what this is. And how many of you can actually guess this RAM, what's the memory size? Just by looking at this. It's 64 megabyte RAM. So those critical infrastructure that I assessed was actually using Windows NT 4 with a 5 gigabyte hard disk running on 64 megabyte of RAM. So no wonder it easily went down. So after finding out all this information, I realized that I need to do additional things. So after segregating it, then after that I need to actually segregate the hardware and memory. So for example, if the system is using Windows XP and Windows NT 4 or 3.1, segregate it, find out the hardware and memory information. Then from there, you can actually scan individually. So one of the site I went to, they have three HMI monitoring stations. So instead of scanning all three of them at the same time, I scan one first. So when I scan it, I mean, again, even after throttling to 1 and 1 of this thing, I throttle it down to 1 and 1, the system still fails. So Windows NT4 and Windows 3.1 seems like they cannot handle nested scan. I mean, that's from experience, you know. So what I did was, after scanning successfully, you have to reboot the system, make it operational again before you scan another one. So this was what I did. Of course, after that, when I do a little bit more research, I realized that there are things that you can actually do besides doing what I just did. It's a bit manual. I will show you later. So this is a methodology that I actually draft when performing assessment on SCADA. The information gathering stage is where you actually perform the interviews, gather documentation if available, because most of the SCADA operational managers doesn't have documentation in place. Collect the live host, find out the operating system, the system specification. Then from there, you actually do the grouping. The typical stuff, servers, workstations, network devices, operating systems, then redundancies or failovers, followed by policy and plugins, where you actually customize your policy and customize your plugins. Then you start the scan. You can scan from individual to a whole group of sites. Of course, the lesser you scan, the better, rather than you scan all at one shot. And finally, you do the validation. And here I put validate non-intrusion vulnerabilities. The reason why I put validate only non-intrusion vulnerabilities is there are some vulnerabilities you cannot validate without exploiting. Things like, for example, things like MS08067, for example, a very common vulnerability back in the days. Metasploit has the ability to have this check utility to check for MS08067. So without exploiting it, you can actually confirm by using that utility. But vulnerabilities such as MS09050, you can't validate it without exploiting it. And because these systems are very critical, live and production, you need to think twice before you actually exploit such vulnerability. Okay, and finally, reporting. So, what are the risks involved when performing vulnerability assessment? So this was taken from this document. So you can actually see two incidents. For ping sweep, it actually noticed that one arm became active and swung around 180 degrees. You can't explain it why, but it happened. And the next incident, it caused a system control creation or integrated in the fabrication plant to hang. So again, these are just normal ping sweep, and already this kind of thing can actually happen. So these are the risks involved. And penetration testing incident. Okay, if you look at the red color one, we just mentioned it locked up the SCADA system, and the utility was not able to send gas. So, so these are the risks involved. So whenever you want to perform assessment on SCADA, you always make sure to inform the people involved, the stakeholders, to actually know that these are the risks involved, and do you really need a penetration testing or just perform vulnerability assessment? All these are the risks. And worst case scenario, there are things that you can actually perform manually. So rather than performing an automatic scan like Nessus or Nmap, or ping sweep or this kind of thing, you can actually perform manually. So NIST has given some suggestion. For finding out physical hardware, you can actually find out from examining the router. Perform physical verification. And for port scan, instead of using Nmap, you can actually use local port verification like NetStat. And to perform vulnerability scan, you can actually do local banner grabbing, or you can actually just go to the control panel and find out the version of your application. Then you just check it to your CVE. So, these are sensitive systems. So if you are afraid that your scan might bring your system down, you can use this reference to actually perform. So these are the SCADA attack metrics that I found while researching about SCADA and stuff. If you look at the attacks, right, it actually is the same as your typical attack on your system. Information tampering, information mining, system shutdown. These are very common attacks. But the most important or most critical kind of attack is the third one, which is gaining control of the SCADA system. Because once you gain control of your SCADA system, you can actually do whatever you want. You can actually, distribute or control, like what you see in Die Hard 4 movie. Controlling the power grid and stuff, oil and gas coming to a specific site and blow it up. It's possible. And these are some of the vulnerabilities that was found on one operating system that I scanned in my engagement. So can you guys see? Okay, so it was running on a Windows XP machine. If you look at the critical vulnerabilities, there's MS08067, a very famous vulnerability. So, and this was taken like only 3 months ago. So you can see how critical the vulnerabilities are actually available on the system, on the critical infrastructure systems. And additional findings like, default admin password, default Cisco password, because they have no sense of security, so everything they leave it as default. So that's the problem. So one of the common myths that people say, thank God SCADA systems are isolated and not part of the internet. But again, how many of you remember this episode? Alright, so this is episode 7 of Simpsons season 7. So what happened was, Homer was too fat to actually work in the power plant. So Mr. Burns allowed him, based on the rule saying that you are too fat to work, you have the right to actually work from home. So Homer has the ability to perform remote access to the nuclear power plant and work from home. So this is one of the problems that we face in the critical infrastructure design. Okay. So, I just want to show to the bunch of people just now. So this was how easy it is to actually find SCADA system through the internet. So if you use certain search engine, I'm not going to name the search engine, but I'm pretty sure many of you know. I didn't hear that, sorry. So, so just by typing the word SCADA on the search engine, you can actually see the list of SCADA machines available online. And of course, the top countries is, again, United States. And this is just the free version. You can actually see 151. If you actually bought the license, or not bought the license, subscribe to it, you can actually see thousands more.
But the big issue in this is that when you do this,
yeah?
you actually start going through these systems, you'll find a lot of them are honeypots.
Oh, really?
Yeah. You should take the time to actually start going through this list.
I can actually show you something. I'm going to show you something that I found.
I know this rule is out there, but there's a lot of honeypots here too.
Oh, okay. Okay, but this is just a reference for you. You can understand what I'm trying to say, right? So some of the vulnerability that was found anonymous FTP access in SCADA systems. So if you were to type SCADA anonymous FTP, you can actually see the list of FTP SCADA online and the list of command you are available is there to actually put in or type in or whatsoever. So this is another good example of how things like Stuxnet, simply just logging in, put inside, rename the thing that looks like a PDF document and just name it salary for employees, and people are just dumb enough or curious enough to actually click on it, and that's it. You own the FTP server or the whole critical infrastructure. And to answer your question, most of it are honeypots, right? This is what I found. Quite interesting. Oh, it's okay. So this is one of the interesting things I found. I just using the term SCADA. So when I found one of the IP address, I just right click, open link in new tab, and this is what I found. Indus Web SCADA, and you have a login console. So as penetration tester or or as hackers, what is the first thing you would do if you were to see this console? Exactly, right? So what you do is, you will actually search for default password for Indus Web SCADA. In this case, it's Indus Web SCADA. So once you do that, and if you can't do it, then it's good that at least they change the default password. But the next thing that you want to do is to actually find out what operating system they are using. So in this case, if you go to the website and look under the system requirement, you will realize that it's running only on Windows systems. So as hackers, you probably know, look, it's Windows system, yes. I know what to do, I know what scans to run, you know. Even an amateur hacker would know what tools to use to actually find vulnerabilities of Windows systems. So, you know, it's possible to actually so-called own critical infrastructure. Yeah. So the takeaways from this presentation. Yeah.
Where was the system located?
I-
I'm just asking because sometimes when you pop these systems out there, they'll be located in universities and other places. So, you know, most of the time it's not really a full-blown scam.
I can't show you exactly what or where these systems are. The reason being is, my company told me to disable or highlight all these things. But yes, there are some governments that I found, universities, yes, and even power providers are available online, because you can actually see the details under the details. But I just cover it off so that I won't get into trouble. Okay. Sorry, what? Okay. Okay. So, SCADA system, takeaways. SCADA system are very sensitive in nature. A lot of information gathering is needed before you perform your scan. So, and if you use the default policies, you are definitely going to have a bad time. So that's why you customize, you use specific plugins. And without talking about SCADA vulnerabilities, the vulnerabilities itself are familiar, because if I want to own the system, I don't really care whether the SCADA application has vulnerabilities. I just care about the operating systems that is hosting the application. So vulnerabilities are very familiar, like I showed you just now. And the types of attacks are also similar. Information mining, information tampering, gain control of the system are very similar as well. And if we think that is an isolated environment, well, you just have to think again. And yes, hacking critical infrastructures are real and possible. You know, if it's not possible, or like what those gentlemen previously said is, die hard for cannot happen, you won't have articles saying that the Russians or the Chinese are always attacking critical infrastructure in the US. I mean, for God's sake, the Chinese are able to actually control a US satellite in 2011 for 7 minutes. So how is it not possible to actually own critical infrastructure? So that's where I'm going with this.
So from your presentation, from what I gathered, is everything you did here was under contract with a company and authorized.
Yes.
And so you weren't out there, hacking.
Nope.
Didn't do this unauthorized. But the
Yep.
custodian searches do show some. They could be honeypots. They could be smaller university systems. So just trying to make sure you get back to Singapore.
Yeah.
To reiterate that these systems are very sensitive, and you have to be very, very careful to go out there and look at this.
Thanks. So some of the links that I posted here, NASA scan policies benchmarking against NERC CIP. I'm pretty sure those who has performed SCADA assessment before will probably make reference to NERC CIP, which is the North American Electricity Reliability Corporation and Critical Infrastructure Protection. So NASA scan policy has this thing from Bandolier, which focus on the CIP scan, NERC CIP scan. So that is something that you might want to take note, which you can actually use when you have a chance to actually perform SCADA assessments. Then if you want to have a look and feel of how SCADA HMI looks like and feels like, you can actually download it from the Schneiderelectric.com. And of course, the rest are all documentation from NIST, NSS-TIB, and NERC-CIP, where you can where whenever you perform assessment, you always rely on the documents here. So, in conclusion, when it comes to SCADA, it is okay to be slightly paranoid. From what I have done so far, I was very anxious when it happened to me, when all the systems were down, because it was a smart grid. They were unable to actually control or monitor the electricity from one side to another side. So I was very scared about the consequences. Yeah, because I have no idea what SCADA was at that time. So when they were shouting and saying, "No, this thing is down, this thing was down," I was like, "Oh shit, come on, please don't hang me." And I was from a country that hanging is like a normal thing for them. So you get the idea. So just, so thanks for listening to my presentation. Do you have any questions? Yes, sir. Hanging but caning. I think if you were to molest somebody, you probably get caning. Yeah.
Well, how secure do you think things are in Singapore when it comes to SCADA? Does the government there take it seriously? Does industry take it seriously, or do you think you have as big problems as we do? This is a smaller country, so there's not as many systems.
You know what? I can talk to you about that offline because this is recording, so I can't speak about it. Okay. Yeah.
Also, I'm very interested in China. Have you had a look at their systems?
Where? China. They are, again, it's recording.
I've never seen someone so afraid.
No, because, yeah. Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, yeah, offline. I'll share with you what I found online. Yeah, so pretty interesting actually. So, any other questions?
Yeah, when can we meet you? What bar?
Sorry?
I just want to know what bar we can meet you at.
After this, I think you can meet me outside here. Yeah, probably just sitting around the corner and just, talk to myself.
TSA checkpoint 3.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Nice job.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.